Hi, everyone. Welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Shane O'Neill, bringing you real talk on marketing and the jewelry industry. Okay, so today we're talking to special guest Daniel Gordon. And on a previous podcast, I had talked about the new jewelry salesperson and how tech has evolved the way jewelry stores market. But that doesn't mean that this is something that's inherently new. Dan's been doing this for some time. Daniel is a fourth-generation jeweler and former president of Samuel Gordon Jewelers in Oklahoma City. After working in his family business for 18 years, he decided to go out on his own and try something new. He landed a position in sales at the Diamond Seller, starting over, and worked his way up to store director in a period of about 7 years. And today, he runs the Diamond Seller's flagship store in Dublin, Ohio, and is involved in the day-to-day operation amongst all of his passions for digital media, which we'll talk about today. So with no further ado, Daniel Gordon, everybody. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Shane, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So for those watching, I want to kind of explain our history a little bit. But most of all, I just did a podcast a few weeks ago about the new jewelry salesperson. And, basically I was talking about how technology has sort of changed the landscape of how salespeople not only market themselves, but also communicate with customers, build relationships with customers. Not only that, but the other types of tech experience that they may have, mainly because, if you can believe it, millennials are turning 40 this year, and a lot of them have capabilities that we may not otherwise talk about when we're in the interview process, right? You're talking about a sales position, you're talking usually about sales, but these intangibles that are important with employees now, where you can have them do other things within the store, that's very important for sales and very important for marketing. And so that new jewelry salesperson, after I did that podcast, before I did the podcast, I instantly thought of you. So my plan was always to have you as a follow-up on this, because I think the history of how you've approached social media is super important. And you were someone who was well ahead of the curve when it came to this kind of thing. And so that's kind of where we transition into sort of the backstory here. So I think I met you the first time was 2010 or something at Centurion. And at the time, you were sort of speaking at all the shows. I was speaking at all the shows. So we were always running into each other, and eventually, met and started chatting. And so, back then even, and back in 2010, if you think about it, Facebook really was just starting to be a talking point with jewelers, and they were trying to figure out how do they adapt it to their business and whatnot. But I remember at the time, man, you knew digital was where things were going. And so you started to adapt to that. And I always found it fascinating and remembered. And I've always seen some of the things that you do online. We're friends on Facebook, and how you communicate and reach out to people on Facebook, that customers that you've forged personal relationships with, which is a tricky thing to do, right? But you've managed to do it. And certainly things have evolved since then. But so I think that's a great starting point for me, is sort of for you to talk about your early adaptation to social media and why.
That's a great question. And, in the very beginning, for me, it was just I've always been into technology. I've always liked something like that could automate, or have, I'm a systems guy, so I like things that make things more efficient. And I just thought to myself, the story I always tell is when I was, it was in the mid to late 90s, and I was living in a condominium complex, and it was like my first real place, and knew a couple of the people in the complex. And there's a guy I made an acquaintance with, and I was coming home after work one night, and I honestly hadn't even heard of the internet. And I walked by his place, and he had the door open. It was a nice day. I guess he was letting some fresh air in. And I could hear these beep and, all these fax type noises at the time. And he said, Daniel, you got to come in here. You got to come see this. I got the internet. And I was like, I got the internet. When you look back, that's a really funny way to say it. But I went in his place. I saw how he could use pictures and not so much video back then, but chat rooms. And he was showing me all that it could do. And I said to myself, this is going to change business. That was the first thought I had, was how do I apply this to my business? Like, this is going to scale communication on a level that is unprecedented. And then, we look fast forward to today. So I was working for my family business at the time, and I went to my dad and I said, we have to get a website, because I had been I take that back, what I said earlier. I'd been toying around on dial-up, mind you, as much as possible on exploring websites, but I didn't really put it into context that there were internet service providers, then there were, the telecommunication company, like learning that you have the hardware, then you have the connectivity, and then you have the service that gets you there. And so all I really knew was website. So we got one. And I got a developer. Back then you had to call your guy, the new HTML, to change every color and every font and add something. They build you by the hour. Today you've got WordPress and every, Magenta, Shopify, you name it. But back then, if you didn't know code, those guys were doing pretty well off of us. So we got our website up, and I was involved. I remember how passionate I was about every last detail, where things were positioned, how it captivated the customer, and how was it going to be a lead generation funnel for our business, not just to have a website. So we got that up and running, and every day I worked on it with our developer and would change things and add things. And it was like I was the project manager and he was the actual surgeon and the coder. And what happened is about 4 or 5, it may have been 6 months after we had the site up, I was in sales, always was in sales. It was always part of my role amongst the other things that I did. And a couple that I just happened to wait on came in unannounced on a Saturday. Didn't know at the time, but what had happened is they looked at our website, saw a brand of diamonds and a brand of engagement ring, and they drove all the way from Dallas, Texas to Oklahoma City. And that was, I believe, we spent the day together, but it ended up being like a $32,000 sale or something like that. Immediately, there was no more, is this going to work? How do we make this even more fruitful? And so I got, my father on board, and, he was my boss at the time. And that evolved into me totally embracing social media from the get-go, because that a lot of people don't remember, because social media has now been out and part of our lives, ingrained in it, whether we want to even be a part of it sometimes or not. Well after the internet as we know it to the public was born. So when Facebook became available to those other than having a college email address, I was first to, I started being the first. I was that guy, right? I was the guy that wanted beta. I was the only guy on Pinterest, I think, for quite some time. I was in Pinterest on beta, and that was amazing because I was sharing pictures of jewelry and everyone was going crazy over it. But yeah, Twitter in 06, 07, and I just really started trying to genuinely, first and foremost, have fun, but also create relationships and add some kind of value when I sprinkle the business stuff in, but not totally business.
Yeah, I think because you and I are both not millennials, we're Gen Xers, and I think Gen X, we were like the first generation that had both old school upbringing and then new tech upbringing, right? Because I remember the same thing when, mid 90s, AOL coming out, and I think you're either a Gen Xer who embraced it or you didn't, and if you did, you were all in. So I was kind of like you. I was just fascinated by at the time just being able to chat with people all over the country in an AOL chat room, and
Right.
we would spend weekends at home, groups of us just talking to people from who knows where, and it was just this new tech, and where's this going to go, and what's going to happen with it. It was so fascinating, and again, you kind of pointed out real quickly, you identify quickly, hey, this has some benefit to me from as a marketing tool, especially as websites went on. And back then, and I got to tell you, like even going into 2008, 2009, even all the way to 2010, it wasn't uncommon to see jewelers who still had sort of these shell websites from 2000, 2001, right? Whereas it was basically an online brochure that they were using. Some people just, again, maybe it's cost, we got having developers and things to do all these kinds of things that made it more difficult for them to get to the place they wanted to be, or maybe even having the vision or understanding of where a website could take them. And of course, now we've transitioned into e-commerce and product showing on websites and people being able to shop and purchase, and it's just changed so much, even in just 10 years. It's kind of crazy when you think where the next 10 years ago. But yeah, I think now that we have this adoption of all this tech, and we've got salespeople who are communicating with people a different way. A good example is an app called Bonjour. I'm just using this as an example, but Bonjour is this video app that allows you to stalls on your phone. And as a salesperson, if you have an appointment for someone coming into the store, you can shoot a video on your phone and actually email them the video. So before they step into the store, they have this personal connection to you. They know what you look like. You could maybe even show them some jewelry that you've pulled before they've come in. And so that's another tool that can be used for a salesperson to establish that relationship before the person's ever come in. So my next question is sort of, knowing that it's important to be a good salesman. That's first and foremost, right? If you're hiring a salesperson, they have to be good at sales. But I think there are some intangibles here nowadays that make it really important for you to understand that when you're interviewing people, that they have these intangibles, the potential for them to be able to shoot photography, to shoot video, certainly do social media, as you were talking about, even doing website updates. Like I said, millennials are hitting 40 this year on the top line, and they have a lot of this experience. Many of them have taken, coding classes in college and have experience, obviously, with social media, which by default translates into video and photography. And a lot of those things are big assets for a jeweler, especially even if you're working with an agency, for your marketing. There's certain things that even an agency, even a local agency, have trouble doing in-house, right? But you can't call your agency every time you want to take a photo of a ring or put a picture of earrings on a model. It's just not tangible. This type of the cost involved to doing things like that is not workable, right? But if you have someone in-house that can do that, it allows you to really scale up your website, add photos of jewelry on models on the website that helps sell through products, so you can see scale and whatnot. So can you kind of speak to those intangibles and how important they are, not only for you, but maybe even for people on staff with you?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with your point more about how, the barrier to entry these days is if you can't speak the language and you can't give the convenience and the experience due to these tools and what they provide. It's not that you can't do well, but there's a humongous gap, and just literally you miss out on a lot with the tools that we have today. And the way I look at it is, and I know you're the same, I'm very appreciative that because of where my generation falls and where my career started, I did get 3 to 4 years experience of none of these tools being available, and all the consumer was dependent upon was walking in the door, picking up the yellow pages. Gosh, I can't even believe I'm saying, and calling around and talking to people, and then who they felt the most comfortable with and who had a good reputation, would at least be on that short list, right? Well, now, I mean, we all know people look at reviews, and then how easy am I as a sales associate making it for A, my consumer to find me, and then B, my consumer to communicate with me, and C, be able to offer maybe the way, to purchase the item with either A, not even coming in foot in the store, or it just being a last mile, mechanism. So I do think having an associate that the product knowledge has to be there. In fact, what I love about this, and I know you and I have touched on this when we've talked before, is that now there's no more faking it. And when I saw those 3 years where I could just say, oh, it's pretty, and I was, probably winging it, and I wasn't on top of my gemological knowledge game, my horological knowledge game, my technical, like from a goldsmithing and bench jeweler standpoint, technical game, that you have to know your chops. It's made all of us way more accountable, because we've all probably gone to other stores and mystery shopped, or just for fun popped in another store and see the clerking, and the reading off the ticket. But if you don't offer something along with the access, you better be able to back up being that expert standing out in both ways. So
Well, not only that, but people educate themselves now more than ever. So they come in, in a lot of cases, because they use the website as a shopping tool, they come in with the intent to buy, and they're educated, especially your engagement and bridal shopper. They're in the market for 2 to 4 months. They're shopping, they're educating themselves, they ask the right questions. So it's and the internet's given them that ability, and along with things like Pinterest and Instagram and all these other kinds of tools that jewelers use to get that information out.
And what your point, I love the direction of this conversation, because what I found is there is a lot of absence of information that a consumer actually needs on the web. So are you gonna? And I'm not going to share it with you today, because that's my feather in my cap. But my point is knowledge yourself up, because I always say know more than your customer knows, not in a know-it-all way, but in an educational way.
Well, it's like what you're saying. When you say knowledge up, it's like they come in armed with all the knowledge about the 4 C's. It's going deeper that they're not knowledged up for, right? So it's like, okay, there's the 4 C's, but that's what everybody talks about. People don't talk about the other things, the other characteristics of buying a diamond that are very important for a consumer too. And that's where your expertise shows, when you start being able to throw down that gauntlet, right?
Right. I equate it to watches, because obviously, I mean, anyone who's followed me knows I am obsessed with timepieces, and fine timepieces I'll never be able to afford, but that's another story. But I have to know every brand, right? I mean, they know one brand and they learn it, like, I mean, the watch enthusiasts of today, with all the watch blogs out there and the forums. But to your point, yeah, I got to know. And the good news is, and I've touched on this with people before, is if you're not passionate about the industry, it's harder. That's what's harder. It's not like, oh, I remember, Daniel, before the internet, how much easier it was. No, you saw a lot of people have a lot of success that are very intelligent, smart people, but didn't have to knowledge up to this level. And maybe 9 to 5 was all you had to deal with. No one gave out their landline back then, right? Before cell phones. It's not like, okay, let me call you at home. If you need anything, I'll give you my home phone number. And it flipped into the phone, the camera, the internet, everything in one. And yeah, I want to be bothered at 11 o'clock at night. I actually do. And you don't have to work nonstop, but my long-winded point that I'm going back around is it changed accountability, it changed accessibility, it changed the technological tools that everyone uses to buy and sell goods, no matter what industry. And you're that person. They still want a person. That's what we've got going for us. Is there, I'm not going to a computer store anymore. I'm not going, and in fact, I didn't even test drive my car. But there's still so much, because we are in an expertise field that I'm not comparing us to doctors and people curing cancer, but in a different way, with the way we touch people's lives at the most meaningful things that they're buying. It is an expert level at the level that most of us do it at. And they need an expert. And guess what? You can't replace an expert. You can't self-diagnose yourself if you have, this illness or that. Any expertise field needs a person. And that's where we are not going to be obsolete. But you've got to embrace the tools, I believe, in order to excel to the highest level that you can.
Yeah, that's a good transition, because, and you're starting to touch on it. But my question is, how did social media, and I suppose tech overall, change how you clienteled, how you looked at a customer, right, coming in? I mean, you mentioned things like availability, right? Answering emails, answering phone calls, those types of things and I think this is a bigger discussion. Of course, we're not going to do it today, but just in terms of even what we've started to see with sort of this shift in work-life balance, right? It's business is more fluid now, it seems, than it was 10 years ago, right? 9 to 5, you're out the door, you're not talking to customers. I'm sure there are people that do and have, but a lot of people don't, right? They clock out and they're done. So how did old school Daniel Gordon evolve because of social media into the guy he is today?
Well, it's provided me so many opportunities I never would have had. I mean, to your point earlier and to your statement, I went all in. I saw the value because I genuinely care about people. Like, I love meeting people. I love making people happy. I love being able to go the extra mile and above and beyond. It makes me feel good about me. That's just how my DNA is wired. And I'm like, wow. So just like a marathon runner runs, and trains, and just like a bodybuilder works out and lifts weights, I said, I'm just going to answer and I'm going to put out, and then I'm going to take in and answer as much communication as I possibly can and try to meet as many people as I possibly can online. And it just turned into one thing after another. And when you say, how did it change? I just was able to get referrals from all the communication. I would give as much attention to someone that I would flat out tell me, I'm not a jewelry person. I'm never going to buy jewelry in my life, but you putting out all these videos and education and teaching me about it makes me think of you. And anytime anyone ever is going to ask, I'm going to refer you. And a really cool thing happened on Twitter. I have a lot of cool stories, but one thing that stood out in my mind is I don't post as much as I used to because, everything's a little bit more one-on-one, whether it's, ephemeral messaging apps or text is like my biggest social network right now is texting, because I have connected. But on Twitter, I was getting my notifications blowing up and I thought to myself, is my account hacked? I don't post that much anymore. And a professional athlete, because I'm going to leave it that broad because I don't want to give any, privacy concerns out, but a professional athlete asked where they could buy a certain high-end timepiece. And I had this army of people like tagging me, like, talk to at Dan Gordon. And I just thought to myself, wow. And it turned into a private message. Then it turned into me selling this individual many expensive timepieces over time. So that's just one story. That was way later on, but it just never dies. If you put the effort in, whether you do it as a personal brand, which is kind of what I did, and I hate that term, but it is, or you do it, your company presence, I think, is completely different. That you have to figure out a marketing strategy, hopefully with Shane right here. But I just developed a credible online reputation for myself that it's still, I get texts out of the blue today. So I just went in on genuinely caring and scaling as much communication. And that conditioned me for what I had done my whole career, which I probably answer more digital communication and know how to put like tone in text and how you want to come off, because it's not the same as you and me right here. My voice goes up, you hear me excited, my facial expression, and there's a lot of text-based communication that's going on now in social media rather than just audio and visual. And a lot of it for what we do is taken private, one-on-one, whether it's a inquiry through your website or a text or what have you, a web chat. So
Yeah.
it's an art form, and I just feel like it's just second nature to me, and I'm glad, because it's a way, with COVID, it accelerated everything even more.
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
especially now when you're talking about buying fine jewelry, like everybody's busy nowadays, right? And
Oh, yeah.
and there talking to the bridal customer is one challenge. Talking to the fine jewelry buyer is another challenge, right? Typically these are older, more affluent people who may be very busy. They may not have time to stop into the store. And if you can connect to them with a video chat or texting or other types of ways, you can communicate with them when they're on the go and about, and build a relationship with them and create a customer from that experience that's so refreshing from waiting for someone to come in the store, right?
Yeah, I've got so too many stories, I can't even share them, where I pulled someone to text, and that's what it is. It's convenience,
Right.
and it's being their person. So
What kind of advice would you give to older salespeople? I mean, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, because man, we're up, we're up there ourselves. It's hard to believe. Although still sprite young lads. But what would you give advice to older people who may be apprehensive to learn tech? I think fear of not understanding tech or whatever it may be a barrier. But what would be your advice to how an older salesperson, or even someone who just hasn't embraced tech? I mean, I suppose even younger salespeople, some of them may have not embraced it or may not think about how social media and tech applies to their job, right? What would be advice you'd give to them in getting started?
first and foremost, you can do it. It's not difficult. Like one thing earlier, I kind of stuttered on that, because you remember in the beginning, there's this whole culture of an industry of social media gurus in the beginning that taught it and made it seem so complex. And it's easy. If you can talk on the phone, if you can take a picture with a Polaroid, I'm simplifying it a little bit, but I'm saying it's not a age demographic brain capacity thing.
Right.
Anybody can do it. So find someone. You can ask anyone, there should be someone in your organization, or a friend or a relative. We've all got that one person that, and I used to be that guy. I'm not anymore, because I know it comes off absolutely obnoxious, but the tech guy that knows every tech, and I used to buy the latest monitor and this and that. Just find that person, because you know what? Guess what? They love sharing it with you, but you can do it. You will catch on so quickly, and it's scary. It's change. And it's just something that you also don't have to let it consume your life. You don't have to be on, like I like being on 24/7. I don't go off the grid, because I see how much opportunity it presents. But you can easily, I have been, doing something with my daughter, and a huge client asked about a specific piece, and I said, with my daughter this weekend, can I get back to you first thing? So people are very respectful. You go as fast or as fast paced as you'd like, but I just want to make everyone aware that it is not rocket science. You get a help from someone like Shane, who knows this stuff inside and out, that will teach it in a way that is very supportive. You're gonna love it, and you actually might get addicted to it.
Definitely will get addicted. If once you get into tech, you get addicted to it, mainly because it's changing so much, and so now you got to have the new shiny whistle, the new bell, which kind of leads me to my last question of the future, right? I mean, look at everything that's happened in just the past 10 years. 2010, trying to convince jewelers to upgrade their website and put product on it. Just 10 years ago, to today with e-commerce and multiple views of products and robust galleries of in-store products and streaming your own POS system to your website, all these things. Where do you see 5 or 10 years from now, and what are some of the things that you're on the outlook for?
Yeah, I'm very confident we'll see, and if you chase the big, the big tech companies and what they're doing and what they're investing in, what's going to happen. We'll see AR and VR experiences. The only thing that I'm not sure of is it going to be a big culmination of in-store AR VR, or is it going to be outside capture of AR VR? I think it's going to be a lot of testing of what works for the luxury sector, not necessarily just jewelry, but any luxury goods. And we see some things coming out right now. I've tested some things, and I think the experience of augmented and virtual reality being part of the shopping experience, that is not something that isn't going to happen. It's just a matter of with all these things, when will the public embrace it? When are the big, like Apple and their glasses, once they, release those, and then there's hundreds of thousands of developers all over the US alone, scrambling to figure out how to make it work. So
yeah, and I think for all of you out there that are wondering, AR, VR, so it's virtual reality, augmented reality, and a lot of people out there might, okay, you guys are crazy. This isn't going to happen the next 5 or 10 years.
Well, we are crazy, but that's a whole nother thing.
Well, I remember back in 2012 writing an article called was talking about the cable cutters, right? About how everybody's getting rid of cable and going to be doing streaming or selective services and things like that. And back then, that was fringe talk, right? That was only people who really were techie enough to be able to get online and do that were doing that. And now we all know what's happening in the cable companies. So it happens that fast. And when you're talking about a virtual reality or augmented reality or any of the other types of tech that seem like they're a ways off in the tech world nowadays is a few years. And for those of you that may doubt what we're talking about, think about right now. Right now, Google does 360 tours of your store, right? So a lot of you out there may already have Google that has a store tour, right, where you can walk around the store. It's not a far leap to understand that at some point, with technology, you may be able to put on a set of Oculus, right, and put on some goggles and put in something that's similar to a web address, and actually be able to walk through a digitized version of a store. Sounds crazy, but in 10 years from now, it might not be that crazy.
Yeah, and if you look at even one thing, and we started in the interview with this, you look at the hardware manufacturers, you look at the telecommunication companies, so where their pipelines coming from to get all this data to turn into pictures and whatnot, and then you've got, what the services are. When you look at just something like the 5G network rollout, which is just starting to happen, there are places in New York, if you have a 5G phone, where you can get 1 gigabyte per second download. If you don't think that that's got something to do with the heavy bandwidth download that is needed for these visual experiences on the go, it all tells a story and starts to come together. Okay, if I want a holographic image of my grandmother in Wyoming to sit with me in the park, and it's really her phone and her broadband, but you're out there in the woods, you guys can have a picnic together. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's whether we want it or not, it's coming.
It's coming. And I think part of embracing tech is getting on the train so that you see the evolution, right? So as you learn, you're aware of what's upcoming, right? It takes a little work. You just don't adapt to one single thing and then you wait 5 years and try to see where the landscape is. It's always evolving, it's always changing. And I think as a store owner, it should excite you for where it could be taking your business. Because trust me, if it's not you, it's going to be someone else that's going to embrace this tech. And as younger generations get older, this is not something that they weren't born into, right? You and I, again, a little bit of old school and then tech explosion. But younger generations, millennials and younger, this has been part of their life since they were able to walk, and they are used to it. They embrace it, and they constantly embrace its evolution. So so I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today, Daniel. That's a great topic of conversation. Before we go, I do want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about the Diamond Cellar and what brought you there and some of the exciting things you're doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a little shameless plug to where I work, the Diamond Cellar, which is based in Columbus, Ohio, and they have locations in Nashville, Tulsa. We also have a pre-owned division. I just wanted to say I would not have been able to take myself to this next level that I've referred to earlier in the podcast without all the amazing talent that I worked alongside, and not talking so much social media, but just in every realm of all the pillars of our industry. Always looking for good people. If you know anyone that wants to kind of learn at the highest level, we're always looking for great people, and the company's always growing. We have amazing leadership and just a joy. Leaving a family business isn't an easy decision, but I will tell you, I landed at probably the only place I'd ever want to be. So
yeah, I think the Diamond Cellar you can tell by the way that the Diamond Cellar does business and the way that they have allowed you to sort of take your talents and flourish as well, is that they're a forward-thinking company, right? And I think everybody needs to be that, especially if you're an owner of a store and you don't know tech. There's people in your store that probably do know tech. Embrace it. It doesn't mean you have to learn it on your own. You probably have employees and staff that are near experts in many different areas that you may not be aware of. So it's so important to find that out, because once you can identify that person, they can bring so much to your team and so much to the business that it doesn't have to be you that adapts all this stuff. It can be the people that have the natural tendency to gravitate towards this kind of digital things.
Yeah, it's a step at a time. And I tell what I always have said. When I first started on, I didn't look at this as like extra work. I looked at like, oh my gosh, like how much easier it is. I used to have to call on the phone each individual, perspective and client. Now I can scale it across I can just do so much more with so much less. And with that becomes a lot more opportunity. That's where the work comes in, but that's why we do what we do, right? So
great show. I appreciate you coming on. Maybe we'll have you on in the future to talk more specific tech, because it's always exciting to get input from industry leaders in the jewelry industry. So appreciate you coming back on. For those of you watching, stay tuned. There's more podcasts coming up. We'll have more interviews. We'll do more deep dives into some marketing and jewelry topics in the future. Stay tuned. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.